All right, let's talk schools and just how schools are performing. I connected with Wirepoints President Ted Dabrowski about what exactly is going on with the Illinois Schools report card, and it's not really that great of news. So let's go ahead and get into that conversation here with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. With an overview, again, Wirepoints President Ted Dabrowski breaking that down for us.
What we found is that there were so many districts across the state, Aurora to Champaign to Decatur to Quincy to Mount Vernon. We found so many places where our kids can't read, where you have single-digit percentages of kids, black kids, some Hispanic kids. In the case of Decatur, only 16% of white kids in the third grade can read at grade level. So the concerns are huge, and yet we've got these really high evaluations of teachers, close to 100% across the state, and you've got the State Board of Education calling most of these schools commendable. We've got really high graduation rates, and yet many of those kids can't. Most of them can't read at grade level. So we've got a real disconnect, and it's a real indictment on the public school system in Illinois.
So did anybody anywhere do well? Dabrowski looking at all 850 different school districts' metrics when it comes to reading, writing, arithmetic, science, graduation rates. Any districts that did well? Again, Ted Dabrowski with Wirepoints.
Well, of course, you've got the good pockets of kids performing well, but overall as a state, we do very poorly. You take a place like Naperville, of course, it does really well. 72% of kids there read at proficiency level, so they pull up the average. But when you pop over to an Aurora East, for example, only 20% of white third graders can read at grade level. Only 9% of black students can read at grade level. Only 13% of Hispanic students can read at grade level. So you've got a real problem there because most of those kids are moved on automatically to the next grades, and by the time they get to 11th grade, they still can't perform. And yet the high majority of those kids graduate anyway.
And you've got the cost per pupil that is in excess of $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 per student that the school report card shows. And this report card is compiled by the Illinois State Board of Education. Anybody can look at this data. But at Wirepoints, President Ted Dabrowski breaking that data down, and he talks a bit about the per pupil cost.
Well, that's the other big thing is that you'll hear the excuse for all these results that we don't spend enough money. When you look at the U.S. Census, they collect all the spending per student per state. And when you adjust for cost of living, we're the 8th highest in the country. So it's not for lack of money, and we're the highest in the Midwest. So we spend a lot of money, a lot more. We spend close to $16,000 per student when you add up the state, local, and federal. And Florida doesn't even spend that much. They spend $9,000 something, so $6,000 less than we do, and yet their results are as good or better than ours. And they have just as many low-income kids as we do, and just as many Hispanics and blacks as we do. So they do far better. And same thing for Indiana. So in Illinois, it's not a lack of money. It's a system that's broken that seemingly can't be fixed.
Again, we're hearing from Ted Dabrowski. He broke down some of the school report card data and what it looks like, and the numbers don't show great results in some of the area schools, Springfield in particular. He breaks that down for us.
Well, Springfield, there it is, our capital. When you look at all students' proficiency, only 27% can read at grade level across the board. And of course, it tanks when you start getting into the minorities. Third grade, only 8% of black kids can read at grade level, 13% for Hispanics. And yet, that problem continues throughout. And yet the graduation rate is 72%. And so, this is a big problem we find is that we're moving kids through the system. We graduate them. We hand them a diploma, but they're not career ready or college ready.
So it's interesting to see a kind of dynamic there of the performance of these students, and yet they're still graduating, and the teachers are getting high marks, and the schools are getting high marks. But you look at the whether or not they're performing at grade level, and that just doesn't seem to be the case. Decatur being another example of that. Yeah,
Decatur's one of the sadder ones. It's more than 8,000 kids go there, so it's a pretty big system, 8,800. And yet that's where you look at 11th graders, right? So here you go, 11th graders are getting ready for the world, and only 13% of all the kids there can read at grade level. Or I should say they don't pass the SAT, or they don't meet proficiency in the SAT. So only 13% meet proficiency. And when you get it down to Black students, only 5% are at reading proficiency in the SAT. So you've got a real problem in a place like Decatur, which is a struggling city with all the manufacturing problems it's had. When you've got the crime problem they have, the level of single motherhood, there's massive problems in Decatur. And what you're adding on to that is hundreds of graduates coming out of Decatur not ready for the workforce. So you can imagine things will be even tougher in Decatur going forward.
Now, teachers and evaluations, there seems to be that problem of not really matching up. And he talks about this graduation rate as well. Again, not matching up with the performance of these students.
Yeah, well, let's go back to Decatur for a minute, right? I mentioned, the black grades are pretty tough, but so are the white grades. When I look at that, only 21% of the 11th graders met proficiency in the SAT. And yet, here's the story, right? It's got a 99.7% teacher evaluation of either proficient or excellent.
So you can see the disconnect there, and that's something that Wirepoints is pretty good at doing, is downloading these numbers, taking a deep dive into them, and then holding a mirror up so people can see what's really going on. All right, so appreciate that from Ted Dabrowski from Wirepoints. It is now 8 o'clock on WMAY.
From the Fly SPI Studios, take the easy way out. WMAY.